Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Kelly Nicoll, President of IOSH, and I'm so pleased to welcome you all to the second webinar in our mental health webinar series. I am joined today by the fabulous Tracey Dangerfield. She's the Director of Skills-Based First Aid as we discuss the importance of emotional awareness in making better decisions. So, Tracey did not set out to be a business owner, but was driven by a desire to make a difference. Her journey began as a creative, expressive therapist, supporting children, parents, and teachers in building resilience. But she quickly noticed that many workplaces face significant challenges around stress, burnout, and mental health. So she decided to do some more. Now, as director at SkillBase First Aid, she and her team offer comprehensive first aid and mental health first aid training, including train the trainer courses. In addition, she designs bespoke programs to help organisations boost emotional resilience and manage workplace stress. At the heart of her work is a deep belief in the power of genuine human connection, helping leaders and teams create safer, happier, and more supportive workplaces. Today, Tracey is going to take us through some practical and powerful tools we can all use to become more emotionally aware and build positive safety cultures and improve our own decision making. She's promised something that could be life-changing, so I am intrigued. Over to you, Tracey.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kelly. Some pressure there. So yeah, hoping I can deliver on that promise at the end. Thank you for that introduction. So yeah, like Kelly said, I'm Tracey. We're going to kick off today, Kelly. We're talking about the power of one word. And that word is should. So Kelly, who's the first person that comes to mind that you might have heard the word should from?
Oh, my parents. Absolutely, my parents. Teachers as well, probably back at school, if we're talking all the way that far back. But yeah, I definitely remember parents going, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, you should eat your greens, all of those kind of phrases. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love it that you went straight there with the parents. Yeah. And who's the next person that you might think of that was
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like teachers, bosses. I've definitely had bosses. Um, John's just come in and said peers, which
yeah,
which I quite like.
friends? Yeah.
Environmental health, HSE, yeah, all of those kind of people, definitely.
Yeah, I guess questionable on the peers bit, but for general theme there, teachers, parents, managers, bosses, there's a theme there that that person
Mm,
represents an authority, an authoritative position, when they've said that to us. And so when an authoritative person uses should with us, we're either going to have two reactions to that. So we're either going to submit or rebel. Um, whichever you whichever way you do that, you're going to typically be left feeling the same, and you're quite possibly going to be uh, swinging one way or the other. You might be a bit split, but you might be naturally more rebellious, or you might be naturally more submit. And what I kind of mean by that is, well, I submit is like, I'll do what the person's done and I'll get it done. And then rebellious might be like, oh, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to rebel and do the complete opposite, or not, or just not do it at all. But in both scenarios, we're left feeling with feelings of guilt, resentment, maybe frustration, maybe there's some anger in there. You're nodding along, Kelly, so I'm guessing this is
mm,
all making some sense. Especially if we've rebelled, because we might be feeling like, oh, I wish I should have done. We might be some shame there, if I'm being really honest, or because I haven't done what I was supposed to have done, and that person's quite an authoritative figure. I can definitely relate to that in my teenage years from parents, if you like, and in a workplace as
definitely.
well with managers. Um, and so can you relate to those feelings, Kelly, in terms of that really simple, just hearing that one word should and how it's triggered a whole
Oh,
kind of wealth of feelings there?
absolutely. I think what I find really interesting is that rebellious bit. Is if somebody tells me I should do something, apart from kind of, it is obviously embedded in legal phrases, etc. But we're away from that at the moment. In my personal life, if somebody tells me I should do something, I am most likely to definitely not do it. Um,
So you
So
can
I
see.
definitely rebel.
So the good thing is what we'll do today is I'm going to break that psychology right down to help you, and hopefully something like that could change your life towards the end of this webinar. So let's just think then in terms of, like, I imagine our audience today, everyone's probably over the age of 20. Would that be a good guess? Yeah. So by the time we're in our 20s, we've developed what I would call a default setting or a default reaction, meaning that we process this word and this stuff without even thinking about it. So it's where I go before I think. I'm not even thinking, it's just automatic reaction. So Kelly, you're automatically being rebellious or you're automatically being submissive. Or you might have a split, and sometimes that depends on the person. Um, you might have be more rebellious at home and might submit more at work, or maybe the other way around. But people that are listening, you might have a natural tendency to go to one or the other. So the problem, or I guess the challenge that we face when we rebel, is people will recognise this, and it might be that they start to label us. And it's not a label that we're necessarily aware of. It might not be feedback that comes directly to us, but we might start getting labelled things like, oh, they're a rebel without a clue, or someone who's resistant to change. I can definitely relate to that. I've labeled people like that before. Um, or someone who is difficult, or defensive, or difficult to work with. And these are the types of labels that might come, and the challenge that comes with the kind of response, that binary switch of becoming rebellious. It becomes a deeper problem if we don't have some emotional intelligence and emotional awareness. And the fact that everyone's here today, there's an interest there, there's an invested interest in emotional intelligence and awareness. So that's great. And hopefully that can help today. But if we don't have that emotional awareness or that emotional intelligence, then that label might develop into people thinking we're aggressive, possibly even a bully. Um, and so that's where the kind of persecutor role might come out of that. So if we're not emotionally aware, people might be labeling us as the persecutor, but we might use more words like aggression. They're aggressive, or they're a bully, or they're defensive, or they're difficult. These are the types of words that other people might use for us, and this might be known or might not be known to us. And it might make us more argumentative or defensive um, because we're responding from those feelings that we can see here. We're responding from that resentment, that anger, that frustration, and it's triggered by that binary switch. We do it without thinking. We're acting on feeling. I don't know if Kelly, if you can relate to this, and if you've got any examples where somebody has said should to you, and it's triggered you to be more argumentative or maybe defensive, or have you got any examples?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one that comes to mind. So I was trialing some rescue at height equipment at work. So we were trialing kind of a new working at height kind of rescue kit, and the trial did not go well. I ended up with huge rope burns on my hands, and I got an email from my boss afterwards, basically saying, "You should have known that that was going to happen. You should have prepared better. You should have done more research." Um, and and yeah, initially that feel like it kind of, I think initially there was kind of it kind of felt very, I felt very hurt, and then immediately became very defensive of, well, I have, because I have done as much research as I possibly could, and me getting very defensive in that moment in time certainly comes across as anger. Um, and then it kind of felt that that relationship, it took awful lot longer to kind of rebuild that relationship with my boss. So
Yeah.
yeah, definitely can relate to that one.
To relate to how that the defensiveness was coming for
Yeah.
those feelings of,
Mm,
and I guess sounds like from what I'm hearing in that example that it was a lot of shame. You were feeling a lot of shame because
definitely.
the trial didn't go very well and you had rope burns
Mm,
and things like that. And this is the health and safety industry, so we will cover, actually there's things that should is really relevant, and we will come across that. So if you're listening and thinking, yeah, but actually, and especially risk assessments, things should be
mm,
followed, we will cover, we will
mm,
look at that. There's the other side to this. So we've got the prosecutor role that kind of comes out of this,
yeah,
but the other side is victim. And what I mean by victim is we will either go into this victim mentality where, oh, why? So for me, it might be like, oh, why does this always happen to me? Or why do I
yeah,
always make that mistake? I never seem to learn. I'll never get where I need to be. It might even trigger some core beliefs like, oh, I'm useless, I'm not good at my job.
Mm,
And this mentality can lead to more negative thinking and spirals into a lower self-esteem and can and impact our mental health. And what we're doing in that mindset is there's a huge emphasis on thinking on others and environment, and then we go into we naturally then we blame others, we blame the environment, and that's when excuses and blames might come up, and because we're taking on this victim mentality.
mm,
So we're kind of going one way or the other. We're kind of going down that defensive, argumentative, because or we're going into this victim mentality. And just to think about this victim mentality for a minute. So for me, I'm aware of my own human traits and the
mm,
things, and when things aren't going well, I might say, just as anybody else, I might point the finger or blame anything or somebody else as to why that hasn't gone to plan or why that's gone wrong. Even in my personal life as a parent, I might say things like, "Oh, my child just doesn't listen to me," and I'm putting the blame on the child and not feeling accountable. It's part of that victim mentality. But
mm,
when in fact, where I am, who I am, and what I am are all reflections of the choices that I've made in my life so far. And as part of emotional intelligence and emotional awareness, I'm willing to own this. Well, I'm not perfect, Kelly, so maybe not 100% of it, but I aim to own it, right?
mm.
So are you following me on this kind of victim mentality? Do you have any examples
I
from
think
your
I
world?
think what's really interesting is if actually we carry on that feeling. I think my initial reaction is absolutely that rebel. I'm not doing it because you told me I should. Um, and I get very my automatic thing is I do get very defensive. And then oftentimes I will sit in it a while, and rather than it becoming external, it then very much turns inward. So from that email going, you should have known better, you should have been able to do that better. It initially ended up being very defensive. And then as I reflected on that, it was, yeah, it led to lots of feelings of I wasn't the right, even to the point where I felt like I wasn't the right person for that job. That I didn't feel that I was very good at what I was trying to do. I suppose it kind of fueled that kind of imposter syndrome feeling that we often talk about as well. And yeah, I think I think once you recognize it, it doesn't take much to kind of pull yourself out of it and think of things in a different way. Um, but yeah, definitely, I think I probably do both an awful lot.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're recognizing there a bit of a split in terms of
Mm,
sometimes you go down the rebellious route sometimes and go through that, and then but it's triggering the same feelings, and there's the victim mentality that might come in, or being
mm,
seen as that persecutor from our peers or our colleagues at work. So yeah, really beautifully recognizing that that flow there of what's happening from just one word, that
mm,
binary switch. We hear should, I should. It feels authoritative. It's going to make us submit or rebel. And then either way, whichever one we choose in that binary switch, it's very black and white, this or that. There's nothing in between. We're left feeling resentment, frustration, anger, guilt, maybe even some shame that you've described here, Kelly, as well. And then as a result of that, we're either playing the role of the persecutor or we're playing the role of that victim. So that kind of, do you recognize that gentle process that's going on inside of you
mm.
when someone says
And
should?
I think it's really interesting as well because it's before you've even actually thought. Do you know what I mean? Like, I mean, I think we can all definitely recognize it when we were teenagers and somebody said, you shouldn't go and do that, you should go and do this. And we definitely would go through that rebellious phase. And I think for me, it's before my kind of the logical part of my brain has really kind of kicked in. It's a reaction rather than an intentional action. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, you're describing what I would say. It's where I go before I think.
Yes.
And you don't even know you're doing it because you just do
Yeah.
it. We just do it. Um, so yeah, well, great. I'm glad that's what makes sense because there's much more about this. So there's someone in your life, Kelly, that uses this as well. Who might that be?
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt, I think I hear the word should from myself in my own brain far more than I hear it from other people.
Yeah.
Like
I
it's
mean, I was
constant.
yeah, I mean, well, dealing with someone that's really emotionally aware here, Kelly, because absolutely went straight there, which is really good to see. Because sometimes I'm having to be like, oh, so the clue is this is personal development work. Who else are you hearing should from? Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we should ourselves an awful lot, and we do it without even realizing it, because it's that binary switch still going on. It doesn't matter if it's another. It doesn't have to be another person saying it. We're doing it, to ourselves internally, and we have two ways of using the word on ourselves. So it's either we're looking back on something. So, oh, I should have bought a house when I was younger, should have worked harder at school, or should have got my IOSH chartership sooner. Um, or we're in the present moment and we're looking forward. I should get that report done from my manager. Should go to the gym. I should eat better. I should save more money. That's something for me at the moment.
Mm,
I should go. I should get this work done before deadline. And there's other words to this as well. It's not just should. There's other words like need, ought to, or shouldn't, or must. They all trigger the same binary process.
mm,
So essentially, what we're doing with this one word is we're pushing ourselves around in the present moment. So we're either telling ourselves to do something in the future or something we should have done. And you've just described really brilliantly, Kelly, what it felt like when somebody else did that to you. So can you imagine what the impact is? And we might not even be aware of it if we haven't done any emotionally intelligent work or emotional awareness. And when you hear it like that, you can begin to understand why it's disempowering, right?
mm. I mean, there's nothing worse. So when I'm kind of when I'm in the office and I'm driving home, and my brain kind of moves out of work mode and starts in you should you should clean. I don't know. I've got a disaster of a spare room. I think most people have got a room or a cupboard that just everything gets kind of shoved away in. And my brain goes, "Oh, you finished work reasonably early. You should go and sort that room out. You should go and sort those clothes out. Oh, the kitchen needs tidying. Like I'm kind of I feel like I'm giving myself a list of things that I must do in order to kind of make everything better. Which is particularly difficult when your brain's rebellious and you just go, well, no, I'm not doing any of it. Um,
So you
so
can
yeah,
see how that flow there is working just by the very simple shoulding
yeah.
yourself to sort out one of your spare rooms. And I totally can relate. I'm sitting in that spare room right now. It's my office come nursery with my 18-month-old changing station still in it and stuff, and everything else just gets dumped in it. And I'm like, yeah, I should sort this environment out, because it would make my brain feel a bit clearer and I can focus better at work or something. And then I remind myself, Tracey, all the things you teach yourself. um,
Mm,
but there's times when should is appropriate, right? So particularly in safety, I should look left or right when I cross the road.
yeah,
But there is another way, and that's what I'm going to talk you through, and in particular to do with the relationship with ourselves, because that's what we have more control over, right, than control of
absolutely.
changing others. And so I'd like to introduce you to this, Kelly, and what I'd like to introduce, if you're up for it, I'd like to introduce you to a 30-day experiment. Um, And listeners, if you're welcome to try this too. And so for the next 30 days, and I know Kelly and I will be at the health and safety event in Birmingham at the NEC in April. So it would be good maybe to, if you're up for this, Kelly, check in with you then and tell me your findings. I don't know if we can share it on the IOS stage, and any listeners that if you come into the event, come and find us and talk to us and tell us about your findings. But maybe we can look back at it then. Are you up for a 30-day challenge, Kelly?
I think it depends what it is, but yeah. In fact, no. Let's go with the power of yes. Yes, let's do it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. So every time you catch yourself saying, I should, I want you to change it to I could. That is the simple as that. That's all I'm going to ask you to do for the next 30 days. I'm going to talk you through the psychology now of what will happen when you do that. So when you change the narrative to I could, firstly, so if I change that narrative, I'll realize that I'm asking myself a question. Instead of I should do this, it's what could I do? So you're changing that, but it's going from being binary, you're giving it color in between.
Mm,
So then, therefore, you're giving yourself autonomy. And this is so we're moving away from pushing ourselves around psychologically. So you should do this, shouldn't do this, to being our own authoritative person, and giving ourselves that autonomy to make a choice. And of course, if we're feeling like we've got more choice and have that sense of autonomy, Instead of submitting or rebelling, we change that narrative, we change that role to be, or we can either agree or disagree. So we're changing that conversation with ourselves. So instead of going from you should do that, we're saying here's an option. What do you think, Kelly? And that's what we're changing it to ourselves. And when we do that, so let me be clear here in terms of like that agree and disagree. It's not binary like the submit and rebellious. There's lots of colour and shades in between this.
Mm.
There's a lot more choice than we might give ourselves credit for. And especially if you can imagine someone, and the second part of this webinar today, we're going to look at stress in more detail and our relationship with that and how that impacts our psychology as well. If we're under a lot of pressure and we're feeling stress, it might be that our inner critic has ramped up the shoulds and the judgment
Mm.
and judging ourselves as well. So this, even in stressful situations, it's really helpful to help you zoom out and give yourself more choice. So then if you're feeling like you've got more choice and you're feeling autonomy, feeling that sense of autonomous, and then our feelings are different, then we're going to feel like we've got more options. And dare I say it, creativity. I know we're a health and safety
Oh.
bunch here and we might not identify with creativity, but creativity, you are being very creative in your roles. The fact that you write a risk assessment is very creative. You need to have that creative skills, those problem solving skills to go, okay, this is a problem. So those like the psychology of going, these things could happen, and I should put these things in place to make these people safe at work. So it's almost changing those. Your job is to assess risk, which is great. You have those skills, and then your creativity is to what are the actions and the things we put in
Mm.
place. And you'll give yourself more of that just by changing this one thing. So you're opening your
Wow.
mind, options become clearer, and so do your choices. And you never know. Yeah, you might find yourself feeling creative, and you might not identify as someone that's creative. So, um,
That's actually really interesting. Um, so I think it also probably helps from a building safety culture perspective. And like, bear with me on the thought process in this one. So I wonder how many times at work we, as health and safety professionals, turn around to somebody and say, you should do that safer. You should read the risk assessment and follow the risk assessment control measures, and you should be wearing your PPE. And if we're aware that people are either going to resentfully submit or rebel when we say should, um, if we change that to could, so what could you do to make this safer? Or what could you do to feel safer? It actually gives the individual or that team an awful lot more power and kind of autonomy as well, which is a really interesting way of looking at it.
well, what you're describing there is the kind of the last part of this journey on my slide here is that sense of
Sorry, did I get
empowerment.
overexcited?
Yeah, you got really ahead there. I love that. So yeah, well, so what I mean by
Mm.
empowerment here as well, it's not about in personal development terms, it's about feeling powerful within, and it's not about feeling power over. And if you've got somebody that's feeling personally powerful in their actions and their roles at work, they're going to more likely to be less distracted, follow instructions, and deliver on the process better versus somebody that's in this over here on this side
Mm.
feeling we might be masking that, and we might not even be aware of those feelings because we've not done any emotional awareness, and we're actually being hijacked by our own feelings because we're being rebellious without even realizing it, because again it's that binary switch that's going inside of us. And really good example there in terms of what could be different. And I guess if somebody isn't following the safety process that you've put in place, instead of going over and being like you should do this,
Mm.
yeah, rephrasing it to be say what could be different, or what could you be choosing to do differently here, and just changing that one word will change how
Yeah.
that person feels, and it'll leave them feeling more empowered and less shamed. And shame, I mean, I could do a
Mm.
whole day on shame, but shame makes us hide, it makes us withdraw.
Mm.
Shame does, and we want people to be aware of safety culture and open to talk about it and feel comfortable to come to a manager if they're not sure. And if we're shaming people, then that's not going to create that safety culture.
Mm.
So if I take your example, Kelly, of your messy room, so like for me, nearly every morning I say to myself, "Oh, I should probably tidy my desk because today," and then I remind myself, no, like I still today have to remind myself and change it to a could. And so it'd be interesting to see how many times, or like how you feel in 30 days, how many times you've changed that. Sometimes you might not even realize it. And then at the end of the day, when you're reflecting, like, oh yeah, there was that should actually. And I did it without even thinking. But when you consciously, this is what we're doing here. We're building our awareness to it because it's stuff we're doing automatically. So when you build that awareness, you change it to
Mm.
could. So it's like, oh, I could clean my desk before work today. That then gives me choice. Sometimes I might do the very thing that I was shoulding myself to do. I might actually clean my desk. Um, and some people that are listening might say, oh, well, it's just a mind trick to get you to do what you should have done. And it's not really about that. This is about
Mm.
it's something completely different here, because the point is it's my choice. It's my choice anyway. And that's why I feel in this example, I might get creative and I might pay for a cleaner to tidy my desk, or pay for my daughter to get some pocket money to tidy my desk. I mean, she's 5, so that isn't probably going to work, but I might get a bit creative, or maybe I'll do it at the end of the day, because cleaning it now, and but I'm giving myself that choice. Now, usually when we do these talks and workshops in workplaces and we do polls, 70 to 75% of people from the polls that we do can all benefit from this shift from I should to I could. So if you're
Mm.
one of these people that could benefit from this is what could be potentially life changing. And I'm really interested to see how you get on, Kelly, with this challenge.
I will absolutely give it a good college try, and I can give it a go, and I will definitely feedback.
Yes, it's not going to be, oh,
And
I should do that 30-day challenge. And then that'll be your first, like, oh, let's change that to I
I
could.
could. I could challenge it, which I
Yeah,
really like. Richard's just mentioned saying that he uses the phrase or the question, kind of, what could you do to keep yourself from harm a lot, and he says it gives the other person a real stake in the conversation, and
absolutely.
I think that's probably that. In fact, you've probably hit the nail on the head there, Richard. It is absolutely, and we've had a couple of questions around kind of must words and all of that kind of stuff. Um, so like you must read the risk assessment, you must wear the right PPE. And I suppose for me, it's that element of we know we've got musts and shoulds and all of that in our legislation and probably in kind of company policy and stuff like that. But we're probably talking more around um those conversations that we have
Yeah,
with people. Um and I think if we start to understand, or certainly as I'm starting to understand, um should versus could, it the more we move towards that could word, it gives people a feeling of having more options and a feeling of being more creative, which I think is
absolutely.
absolutely key. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of, and you can even you can rephrase those examples you shared there. So you must wear PPE is one thing that you
Mm.
said in conversations. You're not trying to say you could wear PPE. That's not what I'm suggesting here,
Yeah.
but you take out the must entirely. So you're taking out this psychology along the left of having
Mm.
people having that binary switch, and you might rephrase it to be like, in order for you to stay safe, this is the process that we do. We wear this, we do that, we do the other, and
Mm.
that is what we follow here, and that's to keep you safe. When you focus on what you want them to do, rather than it's like rather than the must, because the must will feel very authoritative. um
Mm.
and yeah, I totally get, I'm not saying go and rename all your legislation and stuff, because we need to stay safe. I'm talking about that positive safety culture,
Mm.
that day-to-day conversations with staff members and managers, who are responsible for staff members to follow process and to follow the procedures that you put in place. Those types of conversations that might come up with that. But big thing here is about actually internally on ourselves, how much we're shoulding ourselves and how that can. So what I like to describe this as is, if we see it like an 80-20 split, so 80% of things, our reactions and our emotions are all wrapped up in our emotional intelligence and emotional awareness. And if we've not done a lot of work on that, um, we can improve, we can work on that 80% because we have control over that. 20% is other, and we can't change that. And what if you're building the emotional resilience and in that safe, positive safety culture in the workplace, they'll be more resilient to that 20%, and that 20% might be more, authoritative stuff, because they've worked and they've got this 80% of things where they feel their sense of autonomy, and they're not shoulding themselves, and they've got a better sense of emotional awareness. And this leads me nicely, Kelly, into, but you might have some more questions, but in terms of the 80-20 when it comes to our stress as well. So we can actually work on 80% of the stress that we're feeling and change it for the positive. And 20% of it will always be things that we can't control and things that will happen in the workplace or, outside of work or at home. And I'm going to share some good tools around that 80% of what we can be doing to improve our relationship with stress. Was there any other questions or thoughts from the should could work?
Let me just have a quick scan.
Before I moved on.
So there's a couple of comments around even if something is a must because there's kind of there's various bits and pieces. Um, Andrew Hornby has just said something really wonderful, which I think kind of fits in really nicely. Um, it's about a culture of accepting what we do as our culture rather than requiring people to do specific things. So I think kind of rephrasing what you just said. So we wear PPE rather than you must wear PPE.
Yeah.
Like
That changes
it
totally. If someone's saying
shifts.
that to
Yeah.
me, it shifts. I feel it that one of the Indeed surveys recently surveyed a load of, I think it was over 1 million of
Mm,
candidates and stuff. And one of the top things that they're looking for in a workplace is a sense of belonging. And for me, just that shift in language there is adding to that sense of belonging because there's a we and this is what we do. We're part
mm,
of this. We all do it together rather than separating us and them type thing. So even down to a sense of belonging and improving well-being in that respect, definitely. I didn't expect to make that connection on today's webinar.
It's
Um,
great, isn't it? And just
yeah.
one more, Kathy commented that she's been very stressed by work for the last couple of years. I know the feeling. So this year made a conscious decision to take a step back first, to take rushing and pressure out of my role. And now I realize I'm using the could idea and it works. So we've got an enhancement from Kathy already,
Wow, it
and
gave me
I
goosebumps
will,
hearing that. That's really powerful.
which is
Yeah.
great.
Just the
So
power of
yeah.
one word and how it can change your life. And
Mm,
hopefully some of the stuff I'm going to share now around stress, if you put it with that as well, yeah,
mm,
could really be life changing. Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you for
All
sharing that.
right. Let's get on with the stress stuff.
See?
She said very excitedly for some weird reason because I
Are you
think
feeling stressed, Kelly?
I think yes is the short answer. And I think we're very, very good at telling everybody just how stressed we are, aren't we? And that's always really interesting. I think sometimes we wear it as a bit of a badge of honor. But yeah, lots and lots going on in life and work,
Yes.
etc. So yeah.
And to be honest, that badge of honor you describe as well, I see it all the time in workplaces. And I think it's because of stigma around mental health and well-being, we're much more comfortable to say I'm stressed than I'm struggling with my well-being or my mental health. And actually, stress is part of our mental health and our well-being. And if we don't look after ourselves, and if we're in long-term periods of stressness, then we start stressness. That's any words. If we're in long periods of stress, that's going to have an impact on our physical health as well as our mental health. Um, so yeah, and I think there's something in our even in our kind of personal lives as well, in how we're managing stress, and it all will overlap. And I think there's a huge this badge of honor. If we're at work and we say, oh, well, I'm really stressed, we're almost trying it to communicate I'm still working hard, because there's stigma that if we say that actually I'm quite overwhelmed, think I'm reaching burnout, got a lot on at home or not, and there's a lot of stigma in being open and honest about that. So instead we communicate our distress and say I'm really stressed, because we believe that what we're saying is I'm working really hard to my manager, because we don't want them, because the stigma behind talking openly is that they're going to think I'm lazy and I'm not doing my work, and all the stigma behind that. So we really what we're going to do today as part of this stress analogy that I'll talk you through is just really get underneath the psychology of when we're actually feeling stress. And when I talk about stress, there's two forms of stress for me. And I like to split it between pressure and
Mm,
stress. So for me personally, I had a period of, like, when I moved, it's probably 2016, I moved from the Midlands to the South, and I was in between jobs, and I had probably maybe 6 weeks of job hunting, and just being in that limbo. I felt really stressed and quite negative, because I needed some healthy pressure, some healthy stress, a sense of purpose to go to work. So there's sometimes we might feel negative stress or distress when we've not got enough stress in our lives. So just be mindful of that as well. But what I'm going to talk you through here is, if you imagine on the screen here, there's like 5 pillars to this building in front, and these 5 pillars are holding up this stress. And if we're talking about that 80%, so 80% of our stress, if I say to you, Kelly, that you're creating it for yourself, you might be like, what? No, I'm not creating 80% of my own stress.
There's
So
no way
bear
I'm
with me.
creating 80% of my own stress. It's everybody
So
else.
it's work, too much pressure, it's the workload, lots of stuff. Yeah, so there's the 80% of it we're actually creating for ourselves. And as part of emotional awareness and emotional intelligence and the work you can do there in your personal development, is you can understand why we're creating that for ourselves and really work on repositioning that so you reduce the stress that you're creating for yourself. So if you imagine that this stress at the top is the 80%, if you like, that we're creating for ourselves. And I'm going to talk you through the 5 different pillars of what we are creating stress for ourselves on. And hopefully, I mean, when I do this stress workshop, it's usually like a half day to a day. So I'm just going to give you a real snippet and hopefully something you can take away. And then if you feel like you want some more, Kelly, we can maybe make a bit of a coaching session. I'll talk you through the next steps to it if it's something that you find personally benefiting. So I've got a statement for each of these pillars. And the first one I'm going to go through is approval. And the thing is, when we work on these pillars as well, we might go there by naming one thing that's stressing us, that's causing us stress. But then when we identify which pillar it's connected to, it's a little bit like, I view it like a bit like an umbrella, and actually there'll be other things in my life that I'm creating stress about because it's to do with that one pillar. So by approval, what I mean by this is seeking the approval of others. So AKA, we create stress for ourselves by seeking the approval of other people. So that might be at work or at home. I know I'm definitely more stressed around my mother-in-law because I seek her approval way more than everybody else is, and I don't know why. But I do. I seek her approval more. And at work, there might be certain people, maybe like certain senior people or people you've got a lot of respect for that you would really value their approval of. So you might create stress around wanting their approval. And then that then impacts our behavior. So we might see that we change our personality depending on the person that we're with because we're seeking their approval. Or it might even be things like make the choices that we make in terms of the car that we buy or the house that we buy because we're trying to seek the approval of a certain community or a certain group of people that we want their approval of. Or we might be it might impact us in terms of trying to seek the approval of our manager at work. So the next pillar is priority. And this is what I mean by this is that we're not making ourselves a priority. And Kathy said earlier that she was feeling very stressed. I imagine, I don't know if there's a connection here to not making herself a priority. So what that means is I create stress by not making myself a priority. And then the next pillar is pressure. So I'm going to go through these and then we'll go through some examples, like if it's feeling a bit fast, Kelly, but I'll explain them all. We'll go through an example of something that's causing you stress and we'll see how it works. So the next pillar is pressure. So what I mean by this is the putting myself under pressure. So like a bit of a secret super strength. So I think we learn this early on in our lives that if we put enough pressure on ourselves, we put ourselves under enough pressure, we learn new things. But as adults, we kind of take it too far and sometimes we become addicted to it, that hustle and bustle at work and the pressure that we're putting on ourselves and what we expect of ourselves. The next pillar is control. And by this, I mean not letting go of control because, hey, there's so much out of our control. And I imagine in health and safety, you write the risk assessment, you put the procedures in, but it's out of your control if people follow it. There's only so much of it in our control and how much we can influence in that kind of circle of influence. But in the reality of this pillar with control, there's part of our brain that's just trying to control things even when we don't have control. And there will be many situations where you might have had very little or no control of it, but we start to exert some sense of control, and that's what makes us then worry or feel anxious. And so, and then what we've done is that we've maintained the illusion that that by having some kind of control, by worrying about something, we have some kind of control about it. Because like worrying works, doesn't it, Kelly?
No. Yes.
Tricky
I
question.
think it is, of course, it's a trick question because my other half is very good at this. He just goes, just don't worry about it. Like that's the answer to it. I come from a very long line of overthinkers and worriers. And yeah, I think sometimes there is a feeling that by worrying about it and thinking about it an awful lot, you can control the situation a little bit more.
Well, the thing is with worrying, it doesn't work, and it's a little bit like it's a bit like sitting in a rocking chair. It feels good to be rocking on the rocking
Yeah.
chair, but we don't actually get anywhere. Or another
Sorry, I'm
analogy,
laughing because Karen has literally written that in the question and answers.
what
Like
the rocking
literally,
chair?
worrying is like sitting in a rocking chair. You're going backwards and forwards, but not going anywhere.
Yeah,
Absolutely
love that.
brilliant. Just as you
Yeah.
came through. Brilliant. Yeah.
Love that. Another analogy for what I like is like it's like carrying an umbrella around,
Mm,
just in case it rains and you miss all the sunshine. Um, so yeah. So and
mm,
another quote I like is worry does not empty tomorrow of its sorrows, but it empties today of its strengths. Quite like that quote as well.
yeah, I
Um,
like that.
but there is probably a moment, Kelly, in your life where you've been worried about something and you've worried, but then it turned out to be okay. So your brain has said, "Ah, worrying helped." But it didn't.
Yes,
It just
because
turned
everything
out to
turned
be
out
okay.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It wasn't the worrying that made it okay. It just turned out to be okay. Um,
Mm,
so yeah, a lot. So it might be that when we're talking through this, it might be for you a lot of your 80% could be to do with the control pillar, and the work you do on that will significantly reduce the stress that you're creating for yourself. So the final pillar is trust, and what I mean by this is not trusting others or not trusting myself. So do I trust myself, and do I trust other people in this one? So not trusting myself
mm,
can include things like Kelly, you mentioned early imposter syndrome. That's what I would class to this. So I create stress for myself by feeling imposter syndrome because I'm not trusting myself, and I'm creating stress around that. About trusting myself. Not trusting others can be toxic, especially for our relationships, both at
mm.
work and at home. I mean, it can ruin relationships.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess in health and safety, this one is quite important because I imagine it's your job essentially to not trust people and therefore to come up with the plan. Yeah. So it's like we can't trust that everyone will know what to do in this scenario. So we have to think of things that we don't trust. Um, and this is where I'd kind of think about that, like the health, that's a healthy amount of strategic stress that you're doing in order to put your plans in place. And what I mean by how it would be unhealthy in the workplace is if we're not trusting our team to do the processes or to do their job, then we might go around doing the job for them or micromanage them, and that's where it gets a little bit unhealthy. Um,
Mm.
can you relate to any of that, Kelly, with work and health?
Yeah, definitely. I think in one of my other roles, when I was a global health and safety manager, um, that trust element became really, really important because, and I think it made me realize we as health and safety professionals cannot sit on every single person's shoulder all of the time going, do it like this. Have you thought about ways you can do it better? All of those kind of things. Um, and you have to trust that you have to be able to trust that other people understand that if you've done your job right, people understand the risks. They understand the reason that those control measures are in place. They understand the reasons why they use PPE, they have rescue plans, they have health monitoring, all of those kind of things. And if we've got that right, then that trust element becomes much easier that you can trust your teams to get on with their work as safely as they can. Um, but I think that probably took me a long time to kind of realize that. And so I was probably carrying an awful
Probably
lot more.
creating a lot of stress around
Yeah,
that. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Definitely. Mm,
Yeah, because and I imagine what you're describing as well might link to more than one pillar there, this trust and the control.
yeah.
Um, which kind of brings me to my next point. If you can sit and name something that's causing you stress, and then you can ask yourself, okay, what does it connect to? Is it about trust, trusting myself, trusting others? Is it about control, so not being able to let go of the control? Is it about the pressure I'm putting myself under? Is it about not making myself a priority, or is it about needing and seeking the approval of others? You might connect it to more than one. And the more by naming that one stress, that one thing that's stressing you out, and then going through that in your mind, or even just
Mm,
writing it down is really helpful. if it connects to, the more pillars it connects to, it's a real indicator of how much stress that is creating, how much stress you are creating on that, and therefore how much that is having an impact on your health, your well-being, your mental health, your
Mm.
ability to concentrate. Probably you'll be shooting yourself a lot more because you're putting yourself under that pressure and stuff. So if I just use a very straightforward personal example of literally just last week, my 5-year-old went for a hernia surgery at the hospital, and I can connect that to pretty much all of those pillars. And I felt a lot of stress. I was creating a lot of stress around that. Um, maybe not approval. I don't think it connects to that, but the priority, definitely the last week, not prioritize myself because I put everything into my helping my daughter and getting her through this surgery. Pressure, absolutely putting pressure under myself because I'm like, well, I've got work, I've got things to do, and just feeling that pressure of wanting to be a mum, that like I don't work, and be at work like I don't parent, and that huge pressure that I've been putting on myself. Control, absolutely can connect it to that because I don't have control when she's gone off into that surgery, and it's like what, and all the worrying, all the rocking on that chair was so strong, because I was struggling to let go of that control. And then trust, maybe a little bit in terms of like, do I trust myself to, like, is this the right thing for my daughter? Because I'm trusting the medical professional here to say that she definitely needs this surgery, but she doesn't seem in any pain with it. It seems a bit extreme. So I can connect that to all of those, which is a good indicator of how much that's causing me stress. Now, for those that are listening, this is completely new, a new kind of strategy that you're hearing. It'd be really good, like for yourself, Kelly, to just think about naming like the next time you're feeling a bit stressed, or if we've got time on today's webinar, we can go through an example, but the next time you're feeling a bit stressed, name the stress. So what is it? E.g., so like, oh, I'm feeling really overwhelmed with my workload.
Mm.
Uh, or like for me, childcare prices have just gone up or something. And then, so I'm naming that stress. Okay, I'm going to look at the pillars and work out which ones it connects to. And then if I have got more than one pillar it connects to, um, I might, I'm then gonna go, okay, which one is the most impacting on me right now in a negative way? So for me, the last week it would be pressure, because the pressure I've been putting on myself trying to juggle everything. And then want you to ask yourself, what's one small step that you can make that would lower the impact of that pillar? So what's one small step
Mm.
that I could make to stop putting myself under there's so much pressure this week? And it could be like, actually, and that gives me choice. And I think, okay, do you know what? I can look at my workload and I can think about what's important to get done this week and not, and then put it on next week's list, which frees me up a bit more to be with my daughter and help her through the recovery. Um, in the workshop when we do this, there's a lot more questioning that I think people would spend years in therapy trying to get to the answer to. It's really powerful questioning, but we won't. It's a bit much for going through on a webinar today. But maybe, Kelly, if you want me to take you through that separately or something. But yeah, I want you to ask
Mm.
yourself, that's the one small thing that would lower the impact of that pillar. So Kelly, as I'm talking to you, can you think of a thing that stressed you out, that's made you feel a bit stressed recently?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing for me is both of my parents are unwell at the moment. My dad is very unwell, and my mum decided to fall over and break her arm because she wasn't getting enough attention. That is a joke. I'm not that heartless, really. And I think what that's probably done is because of the amount of time that I'm then having, I'm spending more time, much more time with my dad because we're on limited time now, and I'm spending more time at my parents' house because my mum needs that extra support. I've certainly dropped myself from a personal perspective. I've certainly dropped my prioritizing myself down very, very low at the moment. And I think there's very much an element there around when I am seeing it, when I am spending time with my dad there, I'm putting pressure on myself to not be upset around him and to make sure that it's really positive. It's always positive, it's always a positive interaction. Um, and then, yeah, I think control in in the situation that we are in, there is so little control. Like I've not, none of us have been able to, not even my dad, we've not been able to control how well the chemo has gone. We've not been able to control whether things have progressed or not, or, gotten worse or got it just so out of our control. And I think I remember literally the week that my dad got diagnosed. Um, I went and did something incredibly practical and pragmatic, and then also tried to install a downstairs shower in their house so that he didn't have to manage the stairs, which is ridiculous. But I was desperately trying to exert control on really practical things in an environment where I had so little control.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
that was a lot, wasn't it? Sorry,
Yeah.
guys.
No, no,
Yeah.
no, absolutely. And I think really, really, really grateful and thankful, Kelly, for your honesty. And I think it's a privilege, especially when you're on a webinar like this and someone opens up and talks honestly, because it just puts learning like this right into something really real, and it will help people connect to it. So what I'm hearing is, even right from the very beginning of hearing your dad's diagnosis, you can connect that straight to the pillar of control, and you've
Mm,
created more stress around control by and then you've put that into practical elements of going to do. Sometimes the things is it's like I hear quite often, like people will throw themselves into work because it makes themselves feel better. And I'm not saying stop doing that. Practical things, if it's going to make you feel better. What all we're doing here is just zooming out a little bit and just being aware of, okay, I'm creating this stress for myself, and what's the one thing that I could be doing differently to help myself. So you've connected that to control, pressure, and priority from what I heard you saying,
mm.
Kelly. Which out of those three at the moment, in terms of how you're feeling, stands out to be the most impacting in terms of the most that you're creating stress on, do you reckon, out of those three?
So if we'd had this conversation before Tuesday, it would have been control. My dad got really positive news on a rescan. We got the best news we could, which was a big pause button. So not a
Amazing.
cure, but a big pause button. So, and it's interesting because people that are around me really regularly have basically said I look about 5 years younger than I probably did a couple of days ago. And it's I think because we know we now have more time, this element of me stressing and worrying and trying to control something that is incontrollable has definitely dissipated. Doesn't mean that in 3 months' time it's not going to come back when we're back in the rescan process and everything. Um, and I think what that does as well is it has certainly felt like the pressure to always be really positive has probably reduced as well. Um, the next bit is trying to make myself a priority, which I've always struggled with because I'm very good at looking after everybody else and not very good at looking after myself. Strangely enough, that's why it's one of my themes this year, because I can definitely relate to that. And I think as that kind of need for control has kind of released a little bit over the past few days, I'm certainly feeling less stressed within that situation, which is really positive.
Yeah. Well, going back to what I said earlier about the 80-20 split. So a lot of this stuff
Mm,
you're describing is in that 20 the hearing from the hospital about your dad and your results and hitting that pause. It is completely out of your control, and it
mm,
sits in that 20%. This stuff with these pillars, it's like that 80%, because actually
yeah.
if you can work on that 80% and help reduce that and have a better positive relationship with these pillars, so you're not creating as much stress, what
Mm,
you're doing with that is you're creating more room and more resilience for that 20%. So you've got more capacity to
yeah.
deal with what's going on with your
Mm,
family and your mum and your dad. Whereas if you didn't work on that 80%, and then the next time if there's bad news or hard news to hear, or something happens with your mum, or things like that, it's almost a bit like a container that's kind of filling up, and then you're more
mm,
likely to overflow.
yeah.
And so what we're doing here in this emotional awareness and emotional intelligence, like what we're doing is saying, okay, well, this is 80%, this is stuff you can work on day to day. It's not a destination. It's not like, oh yeah, we get to there and we're emotionally aware, we're emotionally resilient, boom bang, I'm perfect. It's always something we work on, and it's always something I'm constantly working on. I'm not perfect.
Mm,
And it's having that emotional awareness to kind of step back and go, okay, I'm feeling stressed, and knowing what your signs are for stress. So for me, I get angrier quicker. I might get a bit
mm,
snappier. I get more impatient. And okay, ooh, that's a real sign that I'm creating stress here. So some of it will be stress that I don't have control over, and it is stress, and can hopefully be in more healthy stress, or I have capacity for. But what am I creating here? And I can take that step back and then look at these pillars and go, okay, it's definitely connected to the control thing, because there's a lot of things going out of my control. So what's the one small thing that I can do or I can let go of to help me
mm.
reduce that, to lower that impact of that pillar of the stress that I'm creating?
It's really interesting. And I think it is, it, you remind, I just had this little moment while you were talking, and there's a Shakespeare quote, and don't worry, I'm not going to start breaking out into to be or not to be or anything. But it's, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So actually, an awful lot, things are just things, and it's our interpretation of it that makes it either a bad thing or a good thing. Um, so I think that probably reflects quite nicely into stress, into how we uphold
Yeah,
stress,
yeah.
is actually it's often it's ourselves that are creating a lot of the stress that we feel that we're
Or
under rather than
And when you think about it in work, when we talk about those badges of honours, we judge
mm,
each other, and I'm not I've definitely been there and judged and be like, well, why is that causing that person stress? Because it's not causing me stress. And we all have different, obviously we've got different
yeah,
backgrounds, different makes, and we've all got different relationships to these pillars. So
mm,
therefore, experiencing the same adversity or challenge will trigger whatever stress we're creating separately. And if I've got a more negative relationship with making myself a priority or needing approval, I'm going to react differently to someone who's actually done a lot of work on that and doesn't seek the approval of others and is quite and trusts themselves and trusts others and has
mm.
done all that work. You're going to have a very different reaction to that adversity to someone that hasn't, and it's working on that. So in terms of control, then Kelly, what is the one small thing that you could do? So notice said could there to help you reduce the impact of control, because you've shared it in a personal capacity with your family, but I imagine that pillar probably shows up all across in other areas like at work and things as well.
Oh, it absolutely does. And I think I go back to I go back to circles of control that I think we spent a lot of time talking about during COVID, was that element of I can control whether I follow the rules. I can control whether I can influence whether people around me follow the rules. I can't control how much toilet roll is the um in the shop, or do you know what I mean? Like, and I
Yeah.
can't control what what the changes in legislation are going to be. And I found that incredibly powerful. You know, I'm really sorry. That hour has just
It
flown
has.
past, and we
Yeah.
have only got a couple of minutes left. There are so many comments and so many really positive stuff. And um, I'm just going to ask you very, very quickly, because there were lots and lots of comments that were coming up in the Q&A section as well. You sneaky people. Um, uh, how about good stress? Like, because there's good stress, right?
Yeah.
And I think, do we need to be aware of whether it's bad or good stress, or is actually using the word good or bad too much of a judgment on ourselves?
I try and stay away from the word good or bad. I'll just share
Mm,
my slide as well in case people do want to connect and talk further about this. That's my LinkedIn slide there.
yeah.
But I would what I like to use is pressure and stress. So seeing stress is
Mm,
the stress is that's causing me stress, which is not good to have too much stress. And pressure is the healthy stress, the healthy amount of pressure that makes me get up in the morning and want to go to work and have a sense of purpose. The pressures that I feel about being a good parent, the pressures that I feel about being a good leader at work, and the pressures that I feel about being a good citizen and in my community, and those really healthy pressures. And then it's just being mindful of when, because sometimes those healthy pressures might tip into
mm,
distress because we've took too much on, and it's
yeah.
built and it's knowing it's being aware of what your signs are when you're just tipping over to into distress, in
Mm,
terms of a healthy amount of positive stress. I think the actual technical term is eustress, is that positive phrase. Um,
fair.
but yeah, I like to talk about pressure and then stress. It's like, oh, I'm under a lot of pressure, might be a good
Mm,
way to be like, I'm okay. A way of communicating that versus I'm feeling quite stressed. And actually, in the
yeah.
workplace, by saying I'm feeling stressed could be an indicator and an opportunity for a conversation around well-being
Mm,
and seeing how we can talk. Because sometimes talking about it is, a problem shared is a problem halved. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, we could go on for like another hour, couldn't we, Kelly?
And we absolutely could, and I think this is the thing. So, if you want to continue this conversation, let's do it on LinkedIn. I'm sure Tracy and I will carry this conversation on, and join us at the NEC in April if you can for an update on my 30-day challenge. Thank you so much for attending this session, and thank you so much for all the really supportive comments, as well. Any value that you have gained from this session can be used as part of your CPD portfolio. Please take care of yourselves and each other, and thank you for joining us today. Thanks very much.